the scent of fresh bread wafting through the dusty streets of Camp Verde, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1882, was the only thing that drew people to Josephine Baker's establishment, though their cruel words followed close behind their appetite for her baking. Josephine had grown accustomed to the whispers and pointed fingers, the way men would elbow each other and snicker when her ample figure appeared in the doorway of her small bakery. But that never made the sting any less sharp when it landed. She had arrived in Camp Verde 3 years prior, a young woman of 22 with dreams of independence and a skill for baking that her mother had passed down through careful instruction. The town itself sat nestled in the Verde Valley, surrounded by red rock formations and cottonwood trees that lined the nearby creek. It was a place where cavalry soldiers, ranchers, and prospectors mingled with shopkeepers and farmers trying to carve out respectable lives in the unforgiving territory. Josephine's bakery occupied a small wooden structure on the main road, painted a cheerful yellow that she maintained herself despite the relentless sun that tried to bleach it gray. Inside, the space was immaculate, with scrubbed wooden counters, shelves lined with loaves and rolls, and the constant warmth from the large oven that she had purchased with nearly all her savings. She lived in 2 modest rooms behind the shop, her entire world contained in that little building that smelled perpetually of yeast and sugar. This particular morning, Josephine rose before dawn as she always did, tying her chestnut hair back with a simple ribbon and donning her work dress, a sturdy calico that she had sewn with extra fabric to accommodate her size. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire in the oven, measuring out flour and water, kneading dough until her arms ached pleasantly with the familiar strain. The physical nature of baking suited her, even if the rest of her life in Camp Verde often felt like walking through a gauntlet of judgment. As the sun crept over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Josephine pulled the first batch of bread from the oven. The loaves were perfect, golden brown with a crisp crust that would give way to soft, pillowy interior. She set them on the counter to cool and began preparing the sweet rolls that were popular among the townswomen, though they rarely met her eyes when they purchased them. The bell above her door jangled at 7 o'clock sharp, and Thomas Ridgway entered with his usual swagger. He was a ranch hand from one of the larger spreads outside town, a man in his 30s with a thick mustache and an even thicker sense of his own humor. "Morning, Josephine," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone she had learned to recognize, the one that meant something cruel was coming. "Got any of those dinner rolls? My boss is having guests, and he wants something to make them feel welcome. Said to get the best bread in town, and well, even if the baker is wider than the doorway, she sure can bake." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral as she wrapped a dozen rolls in brown paper. "That will be 30 cents, Mr. Ridgway." He tossed the coins on the counter, letting them scatter. "You know, Josephine, you might catch yourself a husband if you ate less of your own cooking, though I suppose you are testing the quality, making sure it's fit for human consumption." He laughed at his own joke, scooping up the package and heading for the door. "Then again, maybe you are hoping to get big enough that someone will notice you. Well, we all notice you, that's for certain." The door closed behind him, and Josephine bent to retrieve the coins from where they had rolled across the floor. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her cash box. This was how most days began, and how they continued throughout the morning and afternoon. Men would come for her bread, for her pies and cakes and pastries, and they would leave their money and their mockery in equal measure. By noon, she had sold nearly everything from the morning's baking. The success of her business was undeniable, even if respect remained elusive. She was preparing to close for a brief rest when the door opened again, and Samuel Webb walked in with two of his friends. Samuel worked at the livery stable, a man of about 25 who seemed to think himself quite clever. "Boys, I told you," Samuel announced loudly. "This is where you get the best bread for miles around. Just do not think too hard about how the baker probably ate half the batch before putting it out for sale." His companions snickered, and Samuel continued. "I heard tell that old Henderson ordered a wedding cake last month, and when he picked it up, a whole corner was missing. Josephine here said it got damaged in the oven, but we all know the truth, do not we?" "That is a lie, Samuel Webb, and you know it," Josephine said, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "Mr. Henderson was completely satisfied with his cake, and there was nothing missing from it." "Well, excuse me, Miss Baker," Samuel said with exaggerated courtesy. "I did not mean to offend your delicate sensibilities. We will take 3 loaves of that sourdough if you have not eaten them already." She wrapped the bread in silence, taking their money and turning her back until they left. When the door finally closed, she allowed herself a moment to lean against the counter, fighting back tears that wanted to come but that she refused to shed. She had cried enough in her first year in Camp Verde. Now she simply endured. The afternoon passed more quietly, with several women stopping by for their orders. They were polite but distant, speaking to her only as much as necessary to conduct their business. Josephine understood that association with her was a social risk. To be seen as friendly with the fat baker was to invite speculation about one's own character or appetite. It was lonelier than the mockery in some ways. As evening approached and the shadows grew long across the dusty street, Josephine was preparing to close when she heard the sound of horses outside. This was not unusual, but something made her glance out the window. A group of riders was coming down the main road, their horses tired and covered in trail dust. They looked like they had been riding for days, and as they passed under the slanting sunlight, she could see they were cowboys, probably moving cattle north to the railroad. Most of the group continued toward the saloon, but one rider separated from the others and dismounted outside her bakery. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that spoke of countless hours under the sun. His hat was pushed back, revealing dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything with quiet observation. He tied his horse to the post and stepped onto the wooden walkway, his boots making solid sounds that announced his approach. The bell jangled and he entered, removing his hat in a gesture of politeness that Josephine found surprising. Most men kept their hats on in her shop, as if removing them would suggest too much respect. "Evening, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried an accent she could not quite place. "I apologize for coming so close to closing time, but I have been smelling your bread for the last mile into town, and I would be grateful if you had anything left to sell." Josephine found herself momentarily speechless. There was no mockery in his voice, no hidden joke waiting to spring. He simply looked tired and hungry. "I have some loaves left," she managed to say, "and some rolls from this morning, though they are not as fresh as they were." "I am certain they are better than anything I have had on the trail these past 3 weeks," he said, approaching the counter. His movements were deliberate and calm, like a man who never rushed unless necessity demanded it. "I will take whatever you can spare." She gathered the remaining bread, wrapping it carefully. "This is 4 loaves and a dozen rolls. It will be $1.20. He reached into his pocket and pulled out coins, counting them onto the counter with care. "That is more than fair. My name is Peter Fordham, madam. My crew and I are driving cattle to Prescott, and we will be camped outside town for a few days while we rest the herd." "Josephine Baker," she replied, handing him the wrapped bundles. "This is my bakery." "I can see that you take pride in your work," Peter said, meeting her eyes directly. "The smell alone tells me that you are an artist with flour and yeast." Before Josephine could respond, the door burst open and a group of young men tumbled in, clearly having already spent some time at the saloon despite the early hour. She recognized them as workers from the Verde Valley mines, rough types who came to town whenever they had money to spend. "Well, look at this," one of them said, a stocky man with a scarred cheek. "Big Josie is entertaining a customer." "Better watch out, stranger, or she might try to eat you along with her profits." His friends laughed, and another chimed in. "I hear she goes through a whole cow by herself every week. That is why beef is so expensive in this town." Peter turned slowly to face them, his expression unchanging but something shifting in his posture. "You boys seem to have mistaken rudeness for humor." The scarred man bristled. "We are just having some fun, Cowboy. No need to get your feathers ruffled over the fat baker." "I am going to ask you once to apologize to Miss Baker and leave her establishment," Peter said, his voice remaining level but carrying an edge that suggested he was not a man who made empty requests. "Or what?" the scarred man challenged, puffing up his chest. Peter set down the bundles of bread carefully, never taking his eyes off the miners. "Or I will teach you the manners your mothers clearly failed to instill." The tension in the room thickened like humidity before a storm. Josephine found her voice, desperate to avoid violence in her shop. "Please, Mr. Fordham, it is not necessary. They are leaving." "Like hell we are," the scarred man said, stepping forward. "No drifting cowboy tells me what to do." What happened next occurred so quickly that Josephine barely registered it. Peter moved with startling speed, catching the scarred man's arm as he swung, twisting it just enough to send him stumbling into his friends. Before any of them could recover, Peter had positioned himself between them and Josephine, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "The lady asked you to leave," Peter said quietly. "I suggest you honor that request." The miners exchanged glances, apparently deciding that whatever satisfaction they might get from the confrontation was not worth the risk. The scarred man rubbed his arm, glaring at Peter. "This is not finished, Cowboy." "Yes, it is," Peter replied. "And if I hear that any of you have bothered Miss Baker again, we will continue this conversation outside the sheriff's office." They left, muttering curses under their breath, and the door swung shut behind them. The sudden silence felt almost as startling as the confrontation had been. Peter turned back to Josephine, his expression softening. "I apologize for the disturbance, madam. Are you all right?" Josephine realized she was gripping the counter hard enough to make her knuckles white. She released it, nodding. "Yes, thank you. You did not need to do that. I am accustomed to such talk." "Being accustomed to cruelty does not make it acceptable," Peter said, picking up his bundles again. "No one should have to tolerate being spoken to that way." "You are not from around here," Josephine observed, trying to steady her racing heart. "Texas originally," Peter confirmed. "Been working cattle drives for about 7 years now. Started when I was 18, right after my father died and left me with nothing but a good horse and a recommendation to a trail boss." "And now you are a trail boss yourself," she guessed. "For the past 3 years," he said with a slight smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. "It is hard work, but honest. The cattle do not care about much except grass and water, and the men I hire understand that respect costs nothing but is worth everything." Josephine felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the residual heat from the oven. "That is a good philosophy." My mother taught me that, Peter said. She passed when I was 16, but she made sure I understood that character is measured by how you treat those who can do nothing for you. She would have liked your bread, I think. She loved to bake, but never had much time for it. Would you like to try some now? Josephine heard herself ask, surprising even herself with the offer. I have butter and jam in the back. The bread is better warm, and I was about to have some supper anyway. Peter hesitated, and for a moment she regretted the impulse. Of course, he would not want to spend his evening in the company of the town's laughingstock. But then he smiled again, and she saw genuine pleasure in the expression. I would like that very much, Miss Baker. The boys can wait a bit longer for their provisions. They are likely waist-deep in beer by now anyway. She led him to the small table in the back room, suddenly aware of how modest her living quarters were. The furniture was simple but clean, and she had tried to make the space homey with curtains she had sewn herself and a few wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. Peter did not seem to notice or care about the simplicity. He sat down with a grateful sigh, setting his hat on the chair beside him. Josephine sliced one of the fresh loaves, the knife cutting through the crust with a satisfying crunch. She brought butter from her small icebox and a jar of strawberry preserves she had made from berries she had bought off a passing farmer's wife. "This is very kind of you," Peter said as she set the plate before him. "You stood up for me," she replied simply, sitting across from him with her own slice. "That does not happen often or ever really." He buttered the bread and took a bite, and Josephine watched as his eyes closed in evident appreciation. When he opened them again, there was something like wonder in his expression. "Miss Baker, this is the finest bread I have ever tasted," he said, and there was no flattery in his voice, only honest amazement. "I have eaten in trail camps and saloons, boarding houses and ranch kitchens from Texas to Montana, and nothing comes close to this." "You are exaggerating," Josephine said, but she felt pleasure at the compliment nonetheless. "I am not," Peter insisted, taking another bite. "This is art. The texture, the flavor, the way it is crispy outside and soft inside. How did you learn to bake like this?" "My mother," Josephine said, relaxing slightly. "She worked in a hotel kitchen in St. Louis, and she learned from a French baker who immigrated after the war. She taught me everything, made me practice until my arms ached and I could judge the dough by feel alone." "Why did you come to Camp Verde?" Peter asked, spreading preserves on another slice. Josephine hesitated, unused to anyone asking about her life with genuine interest. "My mother died 4 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. After that, there was nothing keeping me in St. Louis except painful memories. I had saved some money from working in a bakery there, and I heard that Arizona territory was full of opportunities for people willing to work hard. So I came west, found this building for rent, and started over." "That took courage," Peter observed. "Or desperation," Josephine said with a slight smile. "Sometimes they look similar. How old are you, if you do not mind me asking?" 25 now. I was 22 when I arrived, and you?" 25 as well, Peter said. "Born in January of 1857. "March for me," Josephine said, feeling the coincidence create a small connection between them. They continued talking as the light outside faded to purple dusk. Peter told her about life on the trail, about sleeping under stars and waking to frost on his bedroll, about the strange beauty of watching 1,000 cattle move across open grassland like a living river. He spoke of the challenges too, the river crossings that could turn deadly, the constant vigilance against rustlers and predators, the bone-deep exhaustion of spending 16 hours a day in the saddle. In turn, Josephine found herself sharing things she had told no one in Camp Verde. She spoke of her loneliness, of how success in business felt hollow when every customer treated her with contempt or amusement. She told him about the women's church social she had tried to attend once, only to overhear a group discussing how inappropriate it was for someone of her size to appear in public so readily. "That says everything about them and nothing about you," Peter said firmly when she finished. "Small people make themselves feel bigger by cutting others down. You speak as though you have experience with that," Josephine observed. Peter nodded slowly. "My father was a drunk. After my mother died, he got worse, and before he finally drank himself to death, he made sure I knew that I was a disappointment. Too quiet, too serious, not clever enough with words. It took me years to understand that his judgment was worthless." "I am sorry," Josephine said softly. "It made me who I am," Peter replied. "Good and bad together. I learned to judge people by their actions, not their words, and I learned that the opinion of cruel people is not worth the breath it takes to speak." Outside, full darkness had fallen, and Josephine realized with surprise that hours had passed. She rose to light a lamp, and as the warm glow filled the small room, she caught Peter watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "I should let you close up," he said, rising from his chair. "Thank you for the bread and the company. Both were more nourishing than you might realize." "Will you be in town long?" Josephine asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "At least 3 or 4 days," Peter said. "The herd needs rest, and I need to arrange the next leg to Prescott. I will need more bread for my men if you can spare it. I will pay whatever you ask." "Come by tomorrow afternoon," Josephine said. "I will have fresh loaves ready." Peter collected his earlier purchases and walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. He turned back, his weathered face serious in the lamplight. "Miss Baker, Josephine, I know we only just met, and this is going to sound like the words of a crazy man, but I need to say something before I lose my nerve." Josephine felt her heart begin to race again. "What is it?" "I have been drifting for 7 years," Peter said slowly, his words careful and measured. "Moving from one cattle drive to another, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. I told myself that was what I wanted, that the freedom of the trail was enough. But sitting here tonight talking with you, eating bread that tastes like someone poured their whole heart into making it, I realized I have been lying to myself." "I do not understand," Josephine whispered. "I think you do," Peter said, stepping closer. "I am 25 years old, and in all that time, I have never met anyone who felt like home until I walked into your bakery. You are beautiful, Josephine. Not despite anything, just beautiful, period. You are talented and brave and kind, and sitting across from you felt more right than anything has in my entire life." Josephine felt tears beginning to form, but these were different from the ones she had fought back so many times before. "Peter, you do not have to say things you do not mean. I am grateful for your kindness, but you do not owe me pretty lies." "I am not lying," Peter said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "I am standing here like a fool, about to propose marriage to a woman I met 4 hours ago, because I know with complete certainty that if I ride out of Camp Verde without you, I will regret it for the rest of my life." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and sincere. Josephine stared at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery, of jest, of the cruel humor she had learned to expect. But there was none. Peter looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure, a man who had just taken the biggest gamble of his life. "You are asking me to marry you," Josephine said, needing to hear the words again to believe them. "Yes," Peter said simply. "I know it is insane. I know we barely know each other, but I also know that some truths do not need time to prove themselves. I felt it the moment I walked in and you looked at me without judgment, without expectations. I felt it grow stronger with every word we exchanged, and when I imagine riding north without you, everything inside me rebels against it. What about your cattle drive? Josephine asked, her practical mind grasping for solid ground in this suddenly tilted world. I will figure it out, Peter said. My segundo, my second in command, is capable of leading the drive to Prescott, or I will hire someone local, or I will take the herd there and come back. I do not have all the answers, Josephine, but I know the question I am asking is the right one. Josephine sat back down in her chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. Her whole life, she had been taught to expect cruelty or indifference from the world. She had built walls around her heart to protect it from the constant barrage of mockery and contempt. And now this cowboy, this stranger who smelled of leather and dust, was asking her to tear down those walls and trust that he would not hurt her like everyone else had. Why me? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. You could have anyone. You are handsome and capable and you have prospects. Why would you want someone like me? Peter knelt in front of her chair, his dark eyes level with hers. Because you are someone like you. Because your bread tastes like it, was made by someone who understands that creating something beautiful is its own form of prayer. Because you had the courage to come to a hard territory alone and build a life from nothing. Because when those men mocked you, you did not crumble or rage, you just endured with dignity that they could never comprehend. Because sitting with you feels like coming home after a long journey. Is that enough reason? It is too much reason, Josephine said, tears now streaming freely down her face. It is too good to be true. Then test me, Peter said, taking her hands in his. His palms were calloused and warm, his grip gentle but firm. I will stay in Camp Verde. I will court you properly. I will prove that I mean every word I have said. Just do not say no because you think you do not deserve this. You deserve everything, Josephine Baker. I do not know what to say, she admitted. Say you will think about it, Peter suggested. Say I can come back tomorrow and we can talk more. Say you will give this impossible thing a chance to become real. Josephine looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope. Something inside her, some long dormant part that had given up on ever being wanted or loved, began to stir and wake. Come back tomorrow, she heard herself say. We will talk more. But Peter, if this is some cruel joke, if you are doing this because of a bet or dare or some idea of charity, please tell me now. I would rather know the truth and bear the pain than hope for something that does not exist. Peter squeezed her hands. This is no joke. This is me, Peter Fordham, asking you, Josephine Baker, to consider building a life with me. That is the only truth here. He stood, released her hands with obvious reluctance and retrieved his hat. I will see you tomorrow afternoon. And Josephine, thank you for not immediately throwing me out. I know this is sudden. I know it is strange, but I also know it is right. After he left, Josephine sat in her chair for a long time, the lamp burning low beside her. The bread he had eaten was mostly gone, just crumbs remaining on the plate. She touched them with her finger, still hardly believing the conversation that had just occurred. A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find old Mrs. Hendricks from the boarding house, a woman who had always been coolly polite when purchasing bread. I am sorry to disturb you, Miss Baker, Mrs. Hendricks said, but I wanted to tell you something. I was walking past earlier when those miners were bothering you, and I saw that cowboy stand up for you. Then I saw him stay and share supper with you. I just wanted to say it was good to see someone treat you with the respect you have always deserved. Josephine blinked in surprise. Thank you, Mrs. Hendricks. That is very kind. The older woman nodded. I am ashamed it took a stranger to show me that I have been unkind through my silence. You make the best bread in the territory, and you have always been honest and fair in your dealings. That should have mattered more to me than the gossip of small minds. I hope you will forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive," Josephine said, though her throat tightened with emotion, after Mrs. Hendricks left. Josephine prepared for bed, but sleep was elusive. She lay in her small bed, listening to the sounds of Camp Verde at night, the distant laughter from the saloon, the barking of dogs, the wind rustling through the cottonwoods. And she thought about Peter Fordham, about his proposal, about the terrifying possibility that her life might be about to change in ways she had stopped allowing herself to imagine. The next morning, Josephine woke before dawn as always, but everything felt different. The familiar routine of starting the ovens and mixing dough took on new significance. She found herself taking extra care with each batch, wanting everything to be perfect, though she could not say why. Or rather, she could, but admitting it felt dangerous. As the bread baked and the morning light grew stronger, she heard the usual sounds of Camp Verde coming to life. Wagons rolling past, horses whinnying, voices calling greetings. When the first customers arrived, she served them with her usual quiet efficiency, but she noticed something different. Several people met her eyes directly, and Thomas Ridgway, who came in for his morning order, did not make any cruel remarks. He simply paid, thanked her, and left. Word had apparently spread about the previous evening's confrontation, and it seemed to have shifted something in the town's perception of her. Or perhaps it had shifted something in her perception of herself. She stood a little straighter, met eyes more readily, felt less like she needed to shrink into the background of her own establishment. Mid-morning brought Sarah Winters, one of the few women in town close to Josephine's age. Sarah ran the mercantile with her husband and had never been openly cruel, but neither had she been friendly. "Miss Baker," Sarah said, approaching the counter with unusual hesitancy. "I heard about what happened yesterday with the miners and with that cowboy defending you. I also heard he stayed for supper and that he seemed quite taken with you." Josephine braced herself for mockery disguised as concern, but Sarah continued, "I wanted to apologize. I have been standoffish with you and it was not right. You have always been kind when I have come in, and you have never done anything to deserve how this town has treated you. I would like to be friendlier if you would allow it." "I would like that," Josephine said, surprised but pleased. "Good," Sarah said with visible relief. "And if that handsome cowboy is courting you, I hope you will tell the gossiping biddies at church to mind their own business, because you deserve happiness just like anyone else." After Sarah left, Josephine felt lighter than she had in years. It was as though Peter's defense of her had given others permission to see her differently, or perhaps to admit what they had known all along, but had been too afraid of social censure to acknowledge. The afternoon seemed to drag endlessly. She kept glancing out the window, watching for Peter's tall figure. When he finally appeared, leading his horse down the street, her heart performed an acrobatic leap that would have seemed impossible yesterday. He tied his horse and entered, his face brightening when he saw her. "Good afternoon, Miss Baker. I hope the day has treated you well." "It has been surprising," Josephine admitted. "Several people have been much kinder than usual. I think word spread about yesterday." "Good," Peter said firmly. "You should be treated with kindness. It should not take a stranger making a scene for people to recognize that." "I have your order ready," Josephine said, indicating several wrapped bundles on the counter. 6 loaves and 2 dozen rolls. That should keep your men fed for a few days." Peter examined the bundles, then looked at her seriously. "What do I owe you?" she calculated quickly. $2.40. He pulled out coins and counted them onto the counter, but added an extra silver dollar to the pile. "The rest is because your bread is worth more than you charge." I cannot accept that, Josephine protested. You are already paying a fair price. Then consider it payment for another supper, Peter said. If you will have me. I thought about you all night, Josephine, about what I said, about whether I had frightened you or made you uncomfortable. But I have to be honest, nothing changed. I still feel exactly the same way I did yesterday. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. I thought about you too, about what you said. It kept me awake for hours. And what conclusion did you reach? Peter asked, his voice gentle but his expression intense. That I am terrified, Josephine admitted. That everything you said sounds too good to be true. That I want to believe you but I do not know how. That I have spent so much of my life expecting cruelty that kindness feels like a trap. Peter nodded slowly. That is honest, and I appreciate honesty. Can I tell you what I was thinking last night, please? I was thinking about how I have spent 7 years avoiding exactly this. Connection, commitment, the risk of caring about someone enough that losing them would hurt. After my mother died and my father drank himself to death, I decided that moving constantly was safer. If I never stayed anywhere, I could never be abandoned again. But that is not safety. That is just slow death. That is choosing to be alone because being alone hurts less than being left. He paused, collecting his thoughts. Then I walked into your bakery yesterday, and something in me recognized something in you. Pain that has been transmuted into purpose. Loneliness that has not destroyed kindness. Strength that does not announce itself but is undeniable nonetheless. And I thought, here is someone who understands what it costs to keep going when the world does not make it easy. Josephine felt tears threatening again. You barely know me. I know enough, Peter said. I know that you rise before dawn to bake bread for people who mock you. I know that you did not throw those miners out yesterday, even though they deserved it, because you value your business and your reputation too much to cause a scene. I know that you have built something real and lasting from nothing but skill and determination. What else do I need to know? What you would be getting, Josephine said, forcing the words past the constriction in her throat. I am not like other women, Peter. I am not delicate or pretty. I am fat, and that is not going to change. If you are hoping that I will somehow transform into someone different, you will be disappointed. Peter's expression shifted to something almost angry, but the anger was not directed at her. Do you think I am blind? Do you think I have not noticed your size? Josephine, I do not want you to transform into someone different. I want you exactly as you are. Your size does not diminish your beauty or your worth. It is just part of you, like my scars are part of me, like my worn-out boots and my trail-dusty clothes. You are beautiful because of who you are, not despite anything. The world does not see it that way, Josephine said quietly. The world is full of fools, Peter replied. I am not proposing to the world, I am proposing to you. And I will say it as many times as it takes for you to believe me. You are beautiful, you are valuable, and you are exactly what I want. Josephine looked at him, standing in her bakery with complete sincerity written across his weathered face, and something inside her began to crack. Not break, but crack like ice in spring, letting something flow underneath that had been frozen for too long. Have supper with me again, she said. Let me try to believe what you are saying. Peter's face broke into a smile that transformed him entirely. Thank you. That is all I am asking for right now. Just a chance. They ate together again that evening, and this time the conversation flowed even more easily. Peter told her about his mother, about how she had kept the family together through sheer force of will and love, about the songs she used to sing while working. Josephine shared memories of her own mother, of learning to knead dough standing on a stool because she was too small to reach the counter, of the pride in her mother's eyes when Josephine's first solo loaf came out perfect. What happened to your father? Peter asked at one point. "He died when I was a baby," Josephine said. "Kicked by a horse while loading a wagon. My mother never remarried. She said she had loved once and that was enough for her. She poured all her energy into raising me and teaching me her craft." "She did well," Peter observed. "You are a testament to her teaching and her love." As the evening wore on, Peter told her more about his plans. "The cattle drive to Prescott will take another 2 weeks after we leave here. The segundo I mentioned, Frank Turner, he has been with me for 3 years and knows the route as well as I do. If you agree to marry me, I will send the herd north with him and stay here. I have saved most of my pay from the last several drives. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to start something." "Start what?" Josephine asked. "That depends on you," Peter said. "If you want to keep your bakery, I will find work here. If you want to go somewhere else, we will figure it out together. I am good with horses and cattle. I can break broncos, work as a ranch hand, do carpentry. I am not afraid of hard work." "My bakery is successful," Josephine said slowly, trying to imagine this new possibility. "It makes enough to support one person comfortably. With 2 people working, it could make more. And if you are good with horses, there might be opportunities around Camp Verde. The army post still operates and they always need skilled handlers." "So you are thinking about it practically," Peter observed. "That is good. That is smart. But what about what you want, Josephine?" "Not what is practical or sensible, but what would make you happy." Josephine considered the question. "I want what I have never had. I want to be seen and valued. I want to share my life with someone who does not think they are settling by choosing me. I want to build something with another person, something that belongs to both of us. I want children eventually if that is possible. I want what every woman wants, I suppose, but what I stopped believing I could have." "You can have all of that," Peter said softly. "I am offering all of that. And Josephine, you need to understand something. You would not be doing me a favor by saying yes. I would be the lucky one. You would be choosing to share your life with a cowboy who has little more than his horse and his wages, a man who has spent years drifting because he was afraid to settle. You would be the one taking a risk on someone." "We would both be taking a risk," Josephine said. "Yes," Peter agreed. "That is what love is, I think, mutual risk, choosing to trust someone with the most fragile parts of yourself." The word love hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Josephine realized that was what he was offering, what he was claiming to feel after just 2 days. It should have seemed absurd. It should have sent her running for safety. Instead, it felt like the first completely honest thing anyone had ever said to her. "I need time," Josephine said finally. "Not because I doubt your sincerity, but because I need to believe that I am allowed to have this. Can you understand that?" "Yes," Peter said immediately. "Take whatever time you need. I will be in town for at least 3 more days. After that, I will need to make decisions about the herd." "But Josephine, even if you decide you need more time than that, I will come back. After I finish the drive to Prescott, I will come back to Camp Verde. Even if it takes months or years for you to trust this, I will wait." "Why?" Josephine whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because some things are worth waiting for," Peter said. "And you are one of those things." The 3rd day brought an unexpected complication. Josephine was working in the bakery when the door opened and Margaret Crawford entered. Margaret was the wife of the bank president, a woman in her 40s who set the social tone for Camp Verde's respectable society. She was impeccably dressed, as always, and her expression was difficult to read. "Miss Baker," Margaret said formally, "I hope you have a moment to speak with me." "Of course, Mrs. Crawford," Josephine replied, wiping flour from her hands. "What can I do for you?" Margaret looked around the bakery as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I understand that Peter Fordham, the trail boss currently camped outside town, has been paying you considerable attention." Josephine felt her defenses rising. Mr. Fordham has been a customer, yes. Come now, Margaret said, her tone softening slightly. Half the town saw him leave your establishment late in the evening 2 nights running. There is talk, Miss Baker, and I thought you should be aware of it. I am sure there is always talk, Josephine said carefully. People enjoy gossiping. Indeed they do, Margaret agreed. But in this case, I wanted to speak with you because the talk is not all unkind. In fact, I find myself in the unusual position of trying to encourage something that others view with skepticism. This was so unexpected that Josephine could only stare. Margaret continued, I have watched you for 3 years, Miss Baker. I have seen how hard you work, how you have borne unkindness with grace, how you have built a successful business despite considerable social obstacles. I have also, I am ashamed to say, contributed to those obstacles through my silence and distance. Mrs. Crawford, you do not need to, please, let me finish, Margaret interrupted. Yesterday, my husband had business with Mr. Fordham regarding payment for the herd's fodder and water. During their conversation, Mr. Fordham inquired about you. He wanted to know your reputation in town, your character, your history. My husband told him the facts, which are that you are honest, hardworking, and talented. Mr. Fordham then asked whether you were being courted by anyone, and when my husband said no, Mr. Fordham stated plainly that he intended to marry you if you would have him. Josephine's breath caught. He told your husband that? He did, Margaret confirmed. Quite openly, actually. He said that in his experience, a woman who could run a successful business alone in a difficult territory while maintaining her integrity was exactly the kind of woman a smart man would want to build a life with. My husband came home and shared this conversation, and it made me realize something. We have been unkind to you, Miss Baker, not through overt cruelty, but through judgment and exclusion. And here comes a stranger who sees in an evening what we should have seen years ago. I do not know what to say, Josephine admitted. Say that you will consider Mr. Fordham's suit seriously, Margaret said. Say that you will not let the opinions of people who have been unworthy of your time influence your decision. And say that you will allow some of us to try to make amends by being the friends and neighbors we should have been all along. After Margaret left, having purchased 2 loaves of bread and insisted on paying extra, Josephine found herself fighting tears for what felt like the 100th time in 3 days. Her world was shifting so rapidly that she could barely keep pace with the changes. Peter arrived that afternoon, as he had the previous 2 days. Before Josephine could say anything, he spoke. I need to tell you something. I spoke with the bank president yesterday about you. I wanted to know if there was anything in your reputation or history that would surprise me. He told me you were well regarded for your business practices, if not your personal life, and I want you to know that I did not do this to spy on you. I did it because I wanted to understand what you have faced here. I know, Josephine said. Mrs. Crawford told me about it. She did. Peter looked surprised. She came by today to tell me that I should take your proposal seriously, Josephine explained. It seems your openness about your intentions has caused some people to reconsider how they have treated me. Good, Peter said firmly. They should reconsider. But Josephine, I did not do any of this to change the town's opinion of you. I did it because I wanted to make my intentions clear. I am not playing games or passing time. If you agree to marry me, everyone needs to understand that they will answer to me if they continue to treat you poorly. That is quite a claim, Josephine said. It is a promise, Peter corrected. You would be my wife. Protecting you and defending you would be my honor and my responsibility, not because you cannot protect yourself, but because we would be partners. That is what marriage means to me. Josephine took a deep breath. Peter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest, always. You have any doubts about this? Any uncertainty about what you are proposing? Because if you do, now is the time to say so. Before either of us invests more emotion in this possibility. Peter met her eyes directly. I have no doubts about wanting to marry you. I have concerns about whether I am good enough for you, about whether I can make you as happy as you deserve to be, about whether I can build a life stable enough to give you everything you want. But about wanting you, about believing we could build something good together. No doubts at all. I am afraid, Josephine said quietly. I am terrified that this is a dream and I will wake up, or that it is real but will not last, that you will realize you made a mistake, or that circumstances will tear us apart. I am afraid because wanting this so much gives the world power to hurt me in ways I have carefully avoided for years. Fear makes sense, Peter acknowledged. We would both be taking a leap of faith. But Josephine, consider this. You have already proven you are brave. You left everything familiar and came to a hard territory alone. You started a business despite having no connections or support. You endured years of unkindness without becoming unkind yourself. If you can do all that, you can take a chance on happiness. Josephine felt something inside her shift, like a heavy stone being rolled away from a door she had long kept closed. Yes, she heard herself say, the word escaping before she could reconsider it. Yes, Peter repeated, his voice suddenly unsure, as if he could not quite believe what he had heard. Yes, I will marry you, Josephine said more firmly. I am still terrified, and this is still the most impulsive thing I have ever done, but yes, I want what you are offering. I want to build a life with you. I want to take this risk. Peter's face transformed with joy so pure and complete that it erased years from his weathered features. He moved around the counter, and for a moment, they simply stood facing each other, the enormity of the decision hanging between them. Then Peter reached out and cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Josephine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Peter leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle and brief, but it carried the weight of a promise that transcended words. When he pulled back, Josephine saw tears in his eyes that matched her own. "I will make you happy," Peter said. "I swear to you I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "And I will do the same for you," Josephine replied, her voice shaking but certain. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Peter sent his segundo, Frank Turner, north with the herd, having complete faith in Frank's ability to complete the drive to Prescott. He arranged to sell his share of the cattle profits to his business partners, gaining immediate cash in exchange for future earnings. This gave him enough money to establish himself in Camp Verde and contribute to the household finances while he looked for work. The engagement announcement, when it became public knowledge, caused exactly the reaction Josephine had feared and Peter had expected. Some people were genuinely happy for her, including Mrs. Crawford, who began actively including Josephine in social invitations. Sarah Winters threw a small engagement party at the Mercantile, inviting the women of the town and making it clear that snubbing Josephine would now be considered a social offense. But others reacted with mockery and disbelief. Thomas Ridgway, when he heard the news, made a show of asking Peter if he was sure he knew what he was getting into, suggesting that feeding Josephine would bankrupt him. Peter's response was immediate and forceful. He grabbed Ridgway by the shirt and lifted him nearly off the ground, speaking in a voice that carried to everyone in the street. "You will never speak about my wife that way again. In fact, you will not speak about her at all unless it is with complete respect." If I hear that you have said one more unkind word about Josephine, I will make sure you regret it. Are we clear?" Ridgway, faced with Peter's considerable size and evident willingness to back up his words with action, nodded quickly. After Peter released him, Ridgway hurried away, and Josephine, who had witnessed the scene from her bakery window, felt a complicated mix of emotions. She disliked violence and confrontation, but she could not deny the fierce pleasure of seeing someone defend her so unequivocally. They decided to marry quickly, seeing no reason to wait. Peter had no family to invite, and Josephine's only living relative was a distant cousin in Kansas she had not spoken to in years. The wedding was arranged for 2 weeks after the proposal, giving them just enough time to prepare. Josephine made her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in pale blue calico. She refused to apologize for her size or try to hide it. The dress was cut to fit her properly, and she sewed it with the same care she brought to all her work. When she tried it on the night before the wedding, standing in front of her small mirror, she saw herself differently than she had before. She saw a woman about to marry a man who loved her. That changed everything. The wedding took place on a bright September morning at the small church in Camp Verde. The preacher, Reverend Thompson, had known Josephine since her arrival and had always been kind to her. He performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, speaking about love and commitment, about building a life together through trials and joys. Peter stood at the altar in his best clothes, which were still trail-worn but clean and carefully mended. When Josephine walked down the short aisle, his face lit up with such obvious adoration that several women in the congregation began to cry. He took her hands in his, and his voice was steady and clear as he made his vows. "I promise to honor you, protect you, and love you for all my days. I promise to be your partner in everything, to share your burdens and your joys. I promise to see you as you are, to value you as you deserve, and to build a life with you that we can both be proud of. This, I swear before God and these witnesses." When it was Josephine's turn, her voice shook slightly, but she spoke with conviction. "I promise to honor you, support you, and love you for all my days. I promise to be your partner in everything, to stand beside you through difficulties and celebrations. I promise to trust in your love and to give you mine without reservation. This, I swear before God and these witnesses." Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, and when Peter kissed her, the congregation erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, Josephine saw tears on many faces, including some she would not have expected. Margaret Crawford was openly weeping, and even Sarah Winters's usually stoic husband was wiping his eyes. The wedding celebration was held in the church social hall, with food contributed by many townspeople. Josephine had baked her own wedding cake, a 3-tiered masterpiece that drew gasps of admiration when it was revealed. Peter cut the first slice and fed it to her with such tenderness that Josephine forgot anyone else was watching. As the afternoon wore on, various people approached them with congratulations and gifts. Some were obviously trying to make amends for past unkindness, and while Josephine appreciated the gesture, she found she no longer cared as much about their opinions. Peter's love had given her something more valuable than social acceptance. It had given her the confidence to value herself. Their wedding night was spent in Josephine's rooms behind the bakery, which would serve as their home until they could afford something larger. Peter carried her across the threshold with surprising ease, setting her down gently in the lamplight. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands resting on her waist. "Happier than I knew I could be," Josephine answered honestly. "I keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream." "It is not a dream," Peter said, pulling her close. "This is real. We are real." and we have the rest of our lives to build on this foundation." They came together with tenderness and growing passion, learning each other with patience and care. Peter treated Josephine's body with reverence, making her feel desired and beautiful in ways she had never experienced. When they finally lay together in the darkness, Josephine felt complete in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else and everything to do with the man beside her. The weeks that followed brought adjustments and discoveries, as they learned to share space and life. Peter found work at the army post, using his skills with horses to train cavalry mounts. The pay was steady, and combined with the bakery's income, they lived comfortably. Peter insisted on helping in the bakery during his free time, learning to knead dough and prepare pans, content to be Josephine's assistant in her domain. Their partnership extended to all aspects of life. They made decisions together, shared household tasks according to ability and preference, and talked for hours each evening about everything and nothing. Peter told her stories of trail drives, and Josephine shared her dreams of expanding the bakery someday. They planned for a future that stretched out before them, full of possibility. 3 months into their marriage, Josephine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. When she told Peter, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down carefully as if she were suddenly fragile. "Josephine, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Peter replied. "I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am more grateful than I can express. This child will be so loved, Josephine. So incredibly loved." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Josephine continued working in the bakery until quite late, much to Peter's consternation. He worried constantly about her overexerting herself, but Josephine insisted that she felt healthy and that the work was good for her. They compromised by hiring a young woman named Emma to help with the heavier tasks. As Josephine's belly grew, so did the town's acceptance of their marriage. What had initially been viewed as a strange mismatch was now seen as a love match, primarily because Peter's devotion to Josephine was so obvious that even the most skeptical observers had to acknowledge it. He walked her to church on Sundays with his arm around her waist, spoke of her constantly with pride and affection, and made it clear to everyone that he considered himself the fortunate one in the relationship. The baby came on a warm May evening in 1883, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the next day. Peter stayed by Josephine's side the entire time, holding her hand and offering encouragement, refusing to be banished despite the midwife's suggestion that men had no place in birthing rooms. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced, Peter wept openly. The midwife placed the baby in Josephine's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by the intensity of her love for this new person. "What should we name him?" Peter asked, his finger gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "I was thinking James," Josephine said. "James Peter Fordham, after your father's middle name and for you. Are you sure?" Peter asked. "Given my father's history, your father may have been troubled, but the name is just a name," Josephine interrupted gently. "What matters is who our son becomes, and he will become someone good because he will be raised with love." They named him James, and he thrived from the start. Peter proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby, willing to walk the floor at night when James fussed, changing diapers without complaint. Josephine watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him even more deeply, seeing the tender care he brought to fatherhood. The bakery continued to flourish, with Emma taking on more responsibilities as Josephine adjusted to motherhood. Peter had been promoted at the army post, now overseeing the entire horse training program, which came with increased pay and respect. They were able to expand their living quarters, adding 2 rooms to the back of the bakery to create more space for their growing family. As James learned to walk and talk, he showed signs of inheriting both parents' best qualities. He had Peter's calm temperament and Josephine's attention to detail. By the time he was 3, he was already helping in the bakery, standing on a stool to watch his mother work, asking endless questions about measurements and temperatures. In the spring of 1885, Josephine became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was more difficult. She tired easily and spent the last 2 months mostly resting while Emma ran the bakery with Peter's help. But when their daughter arrived in November, healthy and beautiful, all the difficulty was forgotten. They named her Catherine Ann, and she proved to be a completely different child from her brother. Where James was calm and observant, Catherine was energetic and vocal from the start. She kept them constantly busy, and Peter joked that she had inherited his mother's strong will. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of small joys and shared challenges. The bakery became known throughout the region, with people traveling from distant ranches and settlements specifically to purchase Josephine's bread and pastries. She trained Emma so thoroughly that the younger woman eventually opened her own bakery in a neighboring town, maintaining a friendship with Josephine that lasted decades. Peter continued working with horses until an injury from a fall made him reconsider his profession. He was 32 when it happened, thrown from a particularly difficult mount and landing badly enough to break his arm and several ribs. During his recovery, he and Josephine discussed their options. "I have been thinking," Peter said one evening as they sat together after the children were asleep, "that perhaps it is time for a change. The army post pays well, but the work is dangerous, and I do not want to leave you widowed with 2 small children because a horse decided to be unpredictable." "What would you want to do instead?" Josephine asked. "I was thinking we might expand the bakery," Peter suggested. "Not just the space, but the business itself. What if we started a wholesale operation? We could supply bread to the mining camps, the army post, other towns. You could focus on the specialty baking and training others to handle the bulk production. I could manage the distribution and business side." They spent weeks developing the plan, calculating costs and potential profits, discussing risks and opportunities. In the end, they decided to take the chance. Peter left his position at the army post, and they invested their savings into expanding the bakery into a larger building with multiple ovens and space for several workers. The business grew beyond their initial projections. Josephine's bread became famous throughout central Arizona territory, and by 1890, they were employing 12 people and distributing to 20 different locations. The success brought financial security, but also required constant attention and hard work. Through it all, their marriage remained strong. They made time for each other despite busy schedules, still talking for hours in the evening after the children were asleep. Peter never stopped treating Josephine with the same reverence he had shown from the beginning, and she never stopped feeling grateful for the day he walked into her bakery. As their children grew, James showed interest in the business side of the bakery, learning bookkeeping and distribution management from Peter. Catherine, meanwhile, proved to have inherited her mother's gift for baking, creating new recipes that became popular additions to their offerings. In 1895, when Josephine was 38 and Peter 38, they received unexpected news. Josephine was pregnant again. The pregnancy was a surprise, as they had assumed their family was complete. Both felt anxiety about starting over with an infant after so many years, but also excitement at the prospect of another child. Their third child, a son they named Thomas Matthew, arrived in early 1896. He was a healthy baby who seemed to arrive already smiling, bringing a lightness to the household that everyone appreciated. James, now 13, was old enough to be a real help with his baby brother, and 9-year-old Catherine appointed herself the baby's personal entertainer. As the century turned, the Fordham family was well established in Camp Verde. The bakery was the largest employer in town aside from the army post and the mines. Peter and Josephine were respected community members, known for their fairness as employers and their generosity to those in need. One evening in 1902, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, Peter and Josephine sat together on the porch of the house they had built 5 years earlier, a substantial home on the edge of town with a garden that Josephine tended in her spare time. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Regret what?" Peter asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Proposing to me after knowing me for less than a day, giving up your cowboy life, settling in one place." Peter was quiet for a moment, then laughed softly. "Josephine, that might be the most absurd question you have ever asked me. Regret the best decision I ever made. Regret finding love and building a life with my best friend. Regret having 3 incredible children and a successful business, and a home that I actually want to return to at the end of each day." "When you put it that way," Josephine said with a smile. "Every morning I wake up next to you. I am grateful I had the courage to be impulsive that one time in my life," Peter continued. "Everything good in my world started the day I walked into your bakery. Before that, I was just drifting. Now I have purpose and love and family." "How could I possibly regret that?" "I was so afraid to believe you," Josephine admitted. "That first evening when you proposed, I wanted to say yes immediately, but I was terrified." "I know," Peter said, kissing the top of her head, "but you were brave enough to take a chance." "That is one of the many reasons I love you." "I am glad I did," Josephine said softly. "You showed me that I was worth loving. That changed everything." "You were always worth loving," Peter corrected gently. "I just helped you see what was always true." As the years continued to pass, the Fordham family navigated the joys and challenges that life brought. James eventually took over much of the business management, allowing Peter to reduce his hours. He married a schoolteacher named Rebecca, and they gave Peter and Josephine 4 grandchildren in quick succession. Catherine proved to be a brilliant baker, innovating new techniques and recipes that kept the bakery at the forefront of quality. She married later than her brother, at age 27, choosing a quiet rancher named David who appreciated her independent spirit. They had 2 children and continued to live near Camp Verde. Thomas, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher. He attended the Territorial University and returned to Camp Verde to teach at the local school, eventually becoming the principal. He married his childhood sweetheart, a girl named Anna who had grown up 3 houses away from the Fordham home. As Peter and Josephine entered their 60s, they gradually stepped back from active business management, letting James and Catherine run the bakery while they enjoyed their grandchildren and the fruits of their decades of hard work. They had achieved something remarkable. They had built not just a successful business but a legacy of love and respect that touched multiple generations. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1922, the entire town of Camp Verde celebrated with them. By then, they were beloved figures, and the story of their romance had become part of local legend. The fact that Peter had proposed on the day he met Josephine was told and retold, growing slightly more embellished with each telling, but always maintaining the core truth. He had seen her worth immediately and had the courage to act on that recognition. During the anniversary celebration, held in the town square with tables laden with food from the bakery that their children now ran, the mayor gave a speech about how the Fordhams had contributed to making Camp Verde prosperous. But what moved Josephine to tears was when several older women approached her to apologize for how they had treated her in her early years in town. "We were unkind," said one woman who had once been particularly cold. "You were better than all of us, and it took a stranger to make us see it. Thank you for forgiving us and for staying despite how we behaved." "That is in the past," Josephine said graciously. "What matters is the present and the future." That night, after all the guests had left and they were alone in their home, Peter and Josephine sat together in the familiar comfort of their shared life. 40 years, Josephine mused. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you walked into my bakery. Other times, it feels like you have always been there." "In a way, I was always going to be there," Peter said. "Every trail I rode, every decision I made, it was all leading me to that moment when I walked through your door and found my home. Do you still think I am beautiful?" Josephine asked with a slight smile, knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. "More beautiful every year," Peter replied without hesitation. "You are the mother of my children, my partner in everything, the person who made my life make sense. Of course you are beautiful. You will always be beautiful to me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands as they had countless times over 4 decades. Outside, the town of Camp Verde slept under a blanket of stars, and somewhere in that town, the bakery they had built together sat dark and ready for the next day's work. As they finally rose to go to bed, Peter pulled Josephine close. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes. For trusting me, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are, for everything." "I should be thanking you," Josephine replied. "You saw me when I felt invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I felt unlovable. We saved each other," Peter said simply. "That is what love does." They walked to their bedroom hand in hand, their steps slower than they once were but their connection as strong as ever. The cowboy who had tasted her bread and proposed that same evening had kept every promise he made. And the baker who had been brave enough to believe in impossible things had found that sometimes the impossible was simply waiting for the right moment to become real. Their story became one that grandchildren would request again and again. The tale of how Grandpa Peter had known after one bite of bread that he wanted to spend his life with Grandma Josephine. The children would always ask if it was really just one bite, and Peter would laugh and say it was actually 3 bites, but that he had known after the first. As they aged into their 70s, Peter's health began to decline. Years of hard work took their toll, and he developed a persistent cough that worried Josephine. But even as his body weakened, his spirit remained strong, and his love for her never wavered. On a crisp October morning in 1932, Peter woke feeling particularly unwell. Josephine wanted to call the doctor, but Peter refused, saying he just needed rest. They spent the day quietly together, reminiscing about their life, looking through photographs of children and grandchildren, talking about the bakery and the town and all the changes they had witnessed. As evening fell, Peter held Josephine's hand and looked into her eyes with the same intensity he had shown that first evening 50 years earlier. "I need to tell you something important," he said, his voice weak but clear. "What is it?" Josephine asked, fear clutching at her heart. "I want you to know that every single day with you was a gift. Even the hard days, even the days when things went wrong, even the days when we argued or struggled. Every day with you was better than any day without you could have been. You made my life meaningful, Josephine. You gave me everything that mattered. Peter, you are scaring me, Josephine said, tears beginning to fall. You sound like you are saying goodbye. I am just making sure you know, Peter said, reaching up to wipe her tears. I am just making sure you understand how grateful I am. How loved you are, how much you meant to me from that very first moment. Mean, Josephine corrected firmly. How much I mean to you, present tense, Peter smiled. Yes, how much you mean to me, always and forever. He fell asleep holding her hand and he never woke up. The doctor, when he finally arrived, said it was his heart, that it had simply given out after 75 years of beating. Josephine sat beside her husband's body, holding his cooling hand, and felt as though part of herself had been torn away. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from across the territory to pay respects. Peter had touched many lives through his fairness, his kindness, and his unwavering love for his wife. Speaker after speaker told stories of how Peter had helped them, defended them, or simply treated them with the respect that many others denied. But what Josephine remembered most clearly was something their youngest son Thomas said during his eulogy. My father taught me that love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about seeing someone clearly and choosing to value them exactly as they are. He lived that truth every day of his marriage to my mother, and in doing so, he showed all of us what real love looks like. In the months that followed Peter's death, Josephine grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the business they had built together, in the life they had shared. She continued living in their home, keeping Peter's chair by the fireplace exactly as he had left it, sometimes sitting there herself when she missed him most. She lived another 8 years, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She died peacefully in her sleep in January of 1940, at the age of 83. Her children found her in the morning, looking serene with a slight smile on her face. On her nightstand was a photograph from their wedding day, Peter young and handsome, Josephine glowing with happiness that no amount of fading could diminish. They buried her next to Peter in the Camp Verde cemetery, under a cottonwood tree that they had planted together years earlier. The headstone reads simply, Josephine Baker Fordham, beloved wife, mother, and friend. Underneath, in smaller letters, she taught us that love sees what others miss. The bakery continued operating for another 20 years under James's management, then Catherine's daughter took over. It remained a fixture of Camp Verde life, a testament to what Josephine had built through skill and determination. And always, when people purchased bread there, someone would tell the story of how it began with a cowboy who tasted the bread and immediately proposed marriage. Over time, the details became legend, the edges softened and romanticized. But the heart of the story remained true. Peter Fordham had walked into Josephine Baker's establishment, had seen her worth immediately, and had had the courage to act on that recognition. And Josephine, despite her fears and doubts, had been brave enough to believe that she deserved the love he offered. Their love story became part of Camp Verde's history, told to newcomers and repeated to children. A reminder that real love recognizes value where others see only surface, that it takes courage to believe in good things, and that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that seem most impulsive. The bakery building still stands in Camp Verde today, though it houses different businesses now. But locals will still point it out to visitors and tell the story of the baker and the cowboy, of love that bloomed in a single evening and lasted beyond death, of how one man's ability to see truly and one woman's courage to trust changed not just 2 lives but an entire community's understanding of what love should look like.